Well, I want to thank everyone for making time to come hear what we have to say. This has to do with the unfortunate and tragic, I will say, shooting that occurred here in the city of Hendersonville on July the 30th. There was a report of a shooting incident off of Brooklyn Road in Hendersonville on Wednesday, July 3rd. The City of Hendersonville Police Department contacted me later that evening to let me know of the occurrence. They called me when they found out that a man actually died as a result of the shooting. The man's name has been released previously. It's James Stepp. And the man that did the shooting is a man named Greg Spinella. And so the police department, when they called me, told me that they were still in the process, in the very early stages actually, of accumulating and acquiring evidence, which also meant that they were talking to people there. There were witnesses present during this incident. So when they called, they even had people at the police department being questioned at that time. And the issue raised to me, and it was already apparent to the police officers, was that there was an issue perhaps of self-defense that they wanted to look into, given what had been described to them very early on. And so they wanted to be very cautious, not to rush to judgment and charge anybody with anything until they had a real good idea about what occurred there at the scene. And so, and I was very much supportive of that to make sure that we, are real confident here about whether someone should be charged, and then if so, what. And so the police department, I will say, has done an excellent job. They have put together a very comprehensive investigation. They've been very cautious. They've been very thorough, and I feel that we have as complete a picture of the events of what occurred at that Brooklyn Road incident as we're going to have. And so in talking to the police and looking at everything that's occurred, which also includes statements, it includes the autopsy of Mr. Stepp, it also includes some security video that the police obtained from that property. It has been concluded, and the police and I are very much in agreement on this, that the shooting, tragic as it certainly is a justified shooting, however. That's hard news for the family of Mr. Stepp to accept. And we met with the family earlier this morning here in this courthouse. So I don't expect that they are going to like that, and it's going to be difficult for them to process and accept. I understand. But we deal in a world here of evidence. We have to deal with the facts as we have them. And North Carolina law provides that all of our people have the right to defend themselves against aggressive behavior, especially if they feel that their life is in danger or that they are in danger of great bodily injury. North Carolina law provides that. It is a statute. It's done by statute, and it's very clearly stated that we all have that right to defend ourselves. So question is then, do you still submit the case to a grand jury? Do you still prosecute the case? Well, sometimes, in certain cases, the answer is yes, we would. I would have to have facts that would support going to the grand jury and asking them to indict someone, to charge someone, so that I can prosecute them, knowing that there may be an issue of self-defense. In certain cases, it would be appropriate for me to do that. And then to know that someone will argue that they were defending themselves, but I would be confident that I would have enough facts to overcome that. And as a district attorney, I'm not neutral in these matters. I'm an advocate. And so I have to have the facts to support an indictment, and because I'm going to ask a jury ultimately to convict someone of a crime, and then that person will be facing prison time, a prison sentence. So it's a very serious matter. We want to be very cautious in every case. In this particular case, I will tell you that the facts are compelling to support self-defense and to support the fact that Mr. Spinella was justified in doing what he had to do. And the facts are these that support that. He and the decedents, the victims, I'll call him the victim's son, the victim's son worked for Mr. Spinella. There had been an incident that day, earlier that day, that caused Mr. Spinella to be mad at the son. And it had to do with the damaging of some equipment. And later in the day, Spinella asked the son to leave, just to leave for the day. And the son did so, but then he came back. And when he came back, he and Mr. Spinella continued a heated conversation from what we've been told. Mr. Spinella then fired him and told him to leave. So the son gets in his truck, apparently makes a phone call. There's nothing illegal about that, of course. But the call was to his dad, and his dad shows up, and his dad initially showed up in an adjoining parking lot. It's actually the parking lot of the state probation office here in Hendersonville. It used to be the health department, and you can access it both from Brooklyn Road and from Spartanburg Highway. The video shows, in fact, the dad going through this parking lot, and the dad driving his vehicle onto the business property. And apparently, the dad was borrowing an air compressor. The son asked Mr. Spinella to use the air compressor, and Spinella had asked for that to be returned. So he didn't ask the dad to return, he just asked that it be returned. So the dad comes onto the property. Spinella never met the dad before. He didn't know who this was. And the facts are that the victim got out of his vehicle and he approached Mr. Spinella, who was there with two other witnesses, and demanded that he pay his son money that they believe was owed to him. And the response was that he's not paying him anything, or certainly not paying him that day, that he'll talk about it on Friday. Of course, Thursday being the July 4th holiday, I don't think they were going to work. And then there were expletives used by the victim, and he demanded the money, and according to Mr. Spinella, he was then punched in the head very forcefully. And he dropped to the ground. They'd been knocked out momentarily even. He was face down on the ground. And the punches continued to the back of his head, to his body, to the back of his body. And we have security video that shows that the victim was on top of Mr. Spinella. The victim outweighed Mr. Spinella by 100 pounds or more, certainly. There was a gentleman there that tried to break the fight up, and he ended up getting tangled up, falling down. That allowed Mr. Spinella to do was to turn his body just a few degrees. He was still face down. He carried a concealed weapon in the small of his back, and it was legal. He had the license to do that. He was able to grab that. It was a pistol. He grabbed it. He moved the pistol under his chest, under his arm, stuck the gun into the chest of the victim, and fired it as many times as he could fire it. It fired 3 times. The gun jammed. The video shows that the victim was able to stand up, and as he clutched his chest, and as he left, there were no further shots fired. There was one shot that went into the chest and out through an arm. That was not the fatal shot. The fatal shot was one that was lodged in the pelvic region of Mr. Stepp. There was a third shot that was a graze wound to one of the legs, the other leg of Mr. Stepp. The son goes to his truck, gets his pistol, and he's coming back to do some shooting apparently. But when he sees that his dad's in distress, he abandons that and then goes and gets the dad to his vehicle, and they go to the hospital. I believe they went to Park Ridge. I believe I'm right on that. And then I believe he was taken to Mission after that. Am I right on that, Kyle? He went to Part E first, I'm sorry, and then to Mission ultimately. I think he was pronounced dead at Mission. And so that's what we have. This took place in a matter of seconds. Mr. Spinella spoke to the police and said that he, more than once, said that he believed that he was going to die, that he did not think he would survive this. And it did not occur to him to even get his gun until he felt it in the small of his back, and then given the opportunity to get it, he did so and used it. And he said he fired it. He did say he fired it as much as it would fire, and it was 3 times before it jammed. He, as the victim is up and staggering back away, he does clear the gun, and I think it was able to fire again, but he didn't fire it anymore. And he was still on the ground when all this occurred. He also went to the hospital. He was not admitted, but he did sustain injuries and still has injuries. He's still receiving treatment, both for damage to his head and also, I think actually there's some urological treatment that he still has medical attention for. So he has been injured from this, but he was on his property, his business property, did not invite this man onto his property. And this man, Mr. Stepp, the victim, was the aggressor in this incident. And so while Mr. Stepp did not have a gun on his person, nobody was pointing any guns at anybody, he did have a firearm in his vehicle, and the son had 2 firearms in his vehicle. So everybody had guns. We had 2 eyewitnesses to this, one being a former Hendersonville police officer, Travis Rector. And Travis has given a statement. Travis has a man that works for him, and his name is Patrick. I forget his last name. He gave a statement, and these statements were given independently of one another. Everything is consistent. Everything's not the same. Everybody has a different point of view, but the statements are consistent. The son of the man that died gave 2 statements, and they're very conflicting statements, but statement 2 conflicts with what he first gave, and so in fact the video would seem to show that the son may have in fact been more actively involved in the fight than he has admitted to. So the son was asked to leave the property. He came back when he shouldn't have. He was then fired. So it was hot. They'd worked hard that day. Tempers were high because that property had been damaged, and so it just people were upset. But the law supports what this man did. It's difficult. It's tragic. Yes, this is not the way we want people to handle their disputes. But the facts are compelling that this was an act of self-defense. And for that reason, I will not be submitting an indictment to the grand jury. The grand jury meets Monday, and of course they meet periodically, but the next one meets Monday. I will not be submitting an indictment to this grand jury or any other grand jury. And because ethically, there are not facts to support a charge that we can go and prosecute and successfully argue to a jury that they should convict this man, not on these facts. And I would just tell you, and what I typically do when we get prepared for any case is always pull the jury instructions, because these are the instructions that a judge will give to people that come in for jury duty. And it's telling. The judge would tell a jury, he said, if you may return a verdict of guilty only if the state has satisfied you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's action was not in self-defense. That is, that the defendant did not reasonably believe that the assault was necessary or appeared to be necessary to protect the defendant from death or serious bodily injury, or that the defendant used excessive force, or that the defendant was the aggressor. And it says, if you do not so find or have reasonable doubt that the state has proved any of these things, then the defendant's action would be justified by self-defense, and it would be your duty to return a verdict of not guilty. I would not be in a position as district attorney to satisfy a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that this man was not acting in self-defense. I just would not be able to do that. The facts support self-defense. That's what we have. And I'm sure Mr. Spinella may be relieved to hear that. I know there are many people in the community that have heard a number of rumors, and they may not understand But everybody in the state of North Carolina has the protection of this law. And if people owe people money, or owe them an apology, or owe them anything, there are ways to go about that. But to go and to make demands and then to punch people may have horrible and tragic consequences, as they did in this case. So that's what we have. And it does not give me any pleasure to have to tell that family what I told them this morning, which is what I've just told you. And it doesn't make me happy. And it's very unfortunate. But I will tell you that I very much appreciate the fact that this police department gathered all the facts, talked to everyone, and investigated this case thoroughly. And some may say deliberately or even slowly, whatever. They did a great job and did not rush to judgment here and then dump an incomplete investigation in my lap to deal with. And I can't tell you how valuable it is to be able to work with a law enforcement agency that wants to get it right and do it that way. And these guys have done that. And I've told them that. And it's the detectives and the officers that responded have done a great job. And so I really appreciate them, because we don't want to charge anybody and prosecute people that should not be prosecuted. And that's we take that very seriously. So I understand there'll be people sad by this, people upset with me about this, but it's my duty not to be putting forward any case that shouldn't be go forward. And that's not pleasant, not easy, but that's just where we are with things, and that's our decision. And so the case will not be prosecuting this Mr. Spinella for what happened on July 3rd.
From the beginning of this case, we had heard something about some 6 shots that were fired. Is that not true at all?
No, it was not 6 shots, or 3 shots. I think there was some confusion by virtue of the fact that there were both entry and exit wounds on the body. We had police officers that actually went to the autopsy at Baptist Hospital in Winston-Salem. So they were present during the autopsy, but it was actually just 3 shots and not 6.
And Mr. Spinella was the only person that fired?
That's right, yes.
Can you talk about what happened at the beginning of the day and the time gap between when Mr. Stepp came back? Can you walk me through that day?
Well, I can't give you real details. I know what the police have developed and what I've read. I'm not going to pretend to have it committed fully to memory. I just know that there was an incident earlier in the day where there was a truck owned by Mr. Spinella. It was a work truck that had been damaged or had been driven into a ditch or whatever, and he told everybody to wait. He'd come get the truck out. And I believe that the victim's son did something to try to get it out, and doing so damaged the truck more significantly. And of course, Mr. Spinella, did not react with favor on that. And so I think there'd been an issue that really emanated from that the incident with the truck, and so they just sort of worked forward from that, and he did not initially fire him, but it was later in the day when he made that decision. Everybody was tense, everybody was angry, and so I think it was a rough day, just in terms of the mood that everybody was in, based on dealing with the incident with the equipment.
Was the entire altercation caught on video?
No, and so about the videotape. The police department saw this building. This is an older building, by the way, where this occurred. Several businesses over the years have been there. The police knew or saw the presence of cameras, didn't know if they were hooked up to anything or not, but they asked Mr. Spinella about that. And after he was released from the hospital, I think he was at Park Ridge, actually. I think that's why I thought Park Ridge. He was at Park Ridge. He was released from Park Ridge, and they asked if he would come back to the property and consent for the police to obtain any footage that may have been captured by that camera. He agreed to do that. He showed up, met them there, and then the police obtained that. Then they obtained a search warrant to then look at the footage. footage is, and I'm not real technical, but what I'm told is that it is motion activated. The camera is motion activated, so it's not like a steady stream of video. It jumps around a little bit, but what is significant is it does support what is able to be viewed. Does support Mr. Spinella's statement to the police, and does refute some of the information that the victim's son gave to the police. I think does support. There were two witnesses there, as I said, Mr. Rector and his employee, and it does support what they've said as well. So it jumps around a little bit. There are gaps of several seconds in certain things, but you do see the victim on top of Mr. Spinella, and you see at least I saw at least one punch. I haven't studied it like the police have. What made that video a little bit difficult to view, and this is just from my perspective, is that this occurred later in the day, so as the sun's coming from the west, there's a dark shadow cast where all this took place. There's an awning there, and so it's very dark where all this took place. It's unfortunate, frankly, that it was that way. If the building had been on the other side, facing west, it'd been like having floodlights on it. But because of the positioning of the building and where everybody was standing, I think it makes it challenging to see everything very intricately there. And of course, it's not focused in just on that area. It covers the parking lot and across the road and all those things. But it has been helpful to the police. They would tell you that it has been helpful, not dispositive of everything. And they have, we're not making decisions just based on videotape. It's based on, a combination of things. Certainly the statements and statements are significant as well as that, and the medical evidence from the autopsy and so forth.
Obviously, this is high interest to the community. Will that video be released?
No, by statute, we're not to be releasing it, and we will follow that statute. Now, I know the statute said if there's a court order allowing its release, that's the only way we would do that. And I'll tell you, Justin, two things. We have to follow the law, and I have to make sure that occurs. But in addition to that, and they may not appreciate this, may not agree with me, but the last thing I want to do is submit a video that is not a complete video, and then, but also you've got this. I mean, some of what would be seen here would be very upsetting to the family of Mr. Stepp. Don't want to do anything that makes this any more difficult on them. I'm sure they, would tell you that they could sustain that and so forth. But we have a lot of people to consider here, including the rights of the accused. I have to have responsibility to them as well. So no, the investigation is protected under statute, and I will make sure that occurs until the judge says otherwise.
And can you just address why it took so long? I mean, July 3rd, and then we're just hearing it.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm not the head of the police department, but what I can tell you is they had a lot of people to question. And you're not going to be able, you question, I know the police questioned several people that night, but the suspect had been at the hospital, he had a lawyer, and he didn't speak immediately, which is his right to do. He doesn't have to say anything. So they asked him to come back. So he did not give a statement immediately. Based on the information they gathered, they called some people back in. They had follow-up conversations with some people, and so I think because the element or component of self-defense was pretty evident from what they were hearing initially that night on the 3rd. They wanted to be very careful here. And for that reason, they wanted to be a little more deliberate in how it was approached. And so that's the only thing I could tell you there. And I believe that was the right call, to be honest with you. I know there was pressure to make a decision. And people, I know that the police were requested to make a decision before this man had a funeral and so forth. But every case is different. Every case stands on its own. And every time line on the investigation is different. Some cases, you can move very quickly and make decisions. It's very evident, and decisions can be made within hours. Other times, it's days, sometimes months. Every case is unique and stands on its own. So that's the only thing I can tell you there is that they were very careful, and they talked to anybody that had information about what happened at that property. They spoke with, and they had vehicles to search. They had a lot to do, actually. It's a lot of moving parts to these things. So they did a great job, actually. And by the time they came to me, and they kept me in the loop, and I appreciate that throughout the time, because I was also interested and wanted to know where we were with things. But these guys were great. They kept me in the loop, and then they gave me as complete an investigation packet as they have at this time. We're still, the autopsy itself will not be released for quite some time, but they were present. They know what happened and what the medical examiner at Wake Forest said.
Chief, would you like to expound on the investigation? And if you could stand next to him so we can pick up on that mic.
I think he has answered the question adequately.
Is there legal guidance for what's considered self-defense?
Oh, sure. Yeah. By statute in North Carolina, and absolutely there's, and not only that, but a whole body of what we call common law. In other words, the courts in North Carolina, beginning, I'm talking about at the lowest levels, all the way through the Supreme Court, have set out what that is, and so there's a lot of guidance on this. But right now we have a statute, and this occurred back in 2011, and so I'll just tell you, and I have the statute here, and so this is strongly worded, but it says this, and this is Chapter 14. It's easy for everyone to find. 1451.3 I'm reading from. It said, it says this. It said a person is justified in using force, this is the first part of it, except deadly force against another when, and to the extent that the person reasonably believes that the conduct is necessary to defend himself or herself or another against the other's imminent use of unlawful force. However, a person is justified in the use of deadly force and is justified in the use of deadly force and does not have a duty to retreat in any place he or she has the lawful right to be, if either the following applies. In other words, if and the statute also said if you're at your home, at your place of work, in your vehicle, all those places qualify. Okay. It said so it is justified to use deadly force if you reasonably believe, he or she reasonably believes, that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or herself or another. The statute says this: a person who uses force as permitted by this section is justified in using such force and is immune from civil or criminal liability for the use of such force unless the person against whom the force was used is a law enforcement officer or a bail bondsman. So there's some people acting in their official capacities. That's the only exception. So that's very strongly worded that they are immune from this liability. Now, in a criminal case, somebody may say, well, I'm immune from the liability, and I may take a different view and say, well, I don't believe you are, and I have facts to suggest that you're not. And that's the type of case that I would submit an indictment to a grand jury and ask them to indict that person so that I can prosecute that person, because I have facts that suggest that there was not self-defense. Okay. But in a case where the facts support the use of force, as the statute allows, I have to recognize that. And if I have no facts to rebut that or to suggest otherwise, then that's not somebody that I need to be prosecuting. I think ethically I have that duty. I think morally I have that duty. And certainly I've got to follow the law, to do that. So yeah, we have that. We have the guidance both from our courts for many years, but also from now the statute that codifies the common law from many years that has been consistent with what the statute now shows. Anyone else? Well, thank you for coming and covering this for us. I know it is something that the community is following. I know this is going to be difficult news for some people. I know there are many rumors that surround cases like this, but I can assure people here in our area that the police have acted very professionally. They've done a great job, and I'm very confident with the investigation that they've produced here. And it's given me a high, very high level of comfort in terms of me being able to decide how to proceed here. And so there have been some suggestions that because a former police officer, Travis Rector, was involved, that the SBI, one of the family members suggested that we bring them in. It's unnecessary to do that. I saw no reason to do that whatsoever. He was a bystander. He wasn't an active participant. There have been some suggestions that should this Mr. Spinella had warned this guy that Mr. Stepp, that he had a gun. Well, he didn't know. There was no evidence that he knew this man was coming to his property, or had any indication there was going to be any violent act at all. And so nobody was pointing guns at anybody. Nobody threatened to shoot anybody when he got there. He didn't know who this man was until the man demanded his boy's check, and he sort of concluded who that was at that point. But I know that people are going to have difficulty with this. This is a tragic thing, but this is not the way people should behave, shouldn't handle their disputes. And when you go to somebody else's property, the law does support somebody defending themselves if they believe that they're going to die or they're going to be badly injured. And those are the facts that we have here. Sad as they are, tragic as this whole thing has been, and it is. We take no great satisfaction in having to reach these conclusions, but the police department and I are in agreement that this is the right decision, and we're very satisfied with that, and we're very confident that that's the right call. Okay. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. Thank you.